And our program guest joining us here in the studio this morning is the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. But first we'll see what the Sunday papers are reporting around the country, and has little to do with Julia Gillard, some of this. There's no escaping it, Lenore Taylor, the number one splash in almost all of the Sunday newspapers this morning.
The Prime Ministerial wedding, maybe. It's the interview in the News Limited tabloids with the Prime Minister's partner, Tim Matheson. An interesting, wide-ranging interview, but it brought up these headlines: I want to marry you, Julia, marry me, Julia. The Sunday Age actually went even further, and using that same interview, speculated about a possible wedding date on June 4th or 5th. So I think it's interesting to go back to the actual quote in the story that brought all this about, which is Tim Matheson saying, "At the moment, I'm really quite happy with our relationship the way it is. Like Julia, I don't think we need to be cemented in any other way. We're just happy with the way we are. But I would hope, if I did ask her that, of course, she would say yes, absolutely, it's a natural thing." That's what's brought about all the headlines. Now, I'm sure you'll ask her, Barry, and I'm sure all will be revealed, but I did have a little peek in makeup and I didn't see a rock.
It does fall to me in the national interest to ask the question later on, and I will. But it's important, though, that quote is there as well, where he said he's happy with the way things are, but maybe down the track. But that's not what the headlines suggest.
It's not what the headlines suggest, and it also, the quotes also seem to be suggesting that he was saying, well, if we were going to get married, I'd be the one who'd be asking her rather than vice versa. But you'd have to say, whatever the permutations for the Prime Minister and Tim Matheson, the government needs this like a hole in the head. It really does. I mean, it creates a bit of melodrama, soap opera about the government, a distraction it doesn't need when it's trying to get on with things, at the risk of being
a wedding killjoy.
Yeah, a wedding killjoy. That's me from the Financial Review. You're always a wedding killjoy, but it really doesn't help.
But then maybe it's a distraction from the asylum seekers issue, and Michael Stutchbury, that's there in the papers again this morning, because the first boat that's arrived since the so-called Malaysian solution, the first boat has arrived, and what's going to happen next?
Well, the headline is boat people policy limbo, but I think it's more that we're starting to see the beginnings of this Asian solution. And you've got 32 Iraqis and Afghanis picked up off Scott Reef, and they're not going to be they're going to be taken to Christmas Island, but they're not going to be processed. They'll get fingerprinted and health checks, and then they're going to be taken to some other third country. Chris Bowen, the Immigration Minister, says this, but he won't say which country, so it leaves open, will it be Malaysia, will it be PNG, because these deals haven't really yet been fully signed, or will it be Thailand? And we're starting to see the policy spread, and there's a separate story from the ABC subsequent to that saying that Kevin Rudd met his Thai counterpart on the weekend, and the Thai Foreign Minister says that the Australian-Malaysian deal could provide some sort of certainty, and other countries would look at it. And he says the 5-to-1 ratio, and that's the ratio where the first 800 of the next boat people that arrive get taken back to Malaysia, and in return we take 4,000 fully processed asylum seekers from Malaysia. That 5-to-1 ratio, the Thai Minister said, is something the rest of us will be interested in looking at. So that seems like we've got a fairly established exchange rate, a 1-to-5 exchange rate.
Does he use that terminology, the 1 in 5?
He says the 5-to-1 ratio is something the rest of us will be interested in looking at.
They're really getting to the crunch point on this, aren't they? Now that there is a boat, the people are going to Christmas Island, they have to be sent back somewhere. The government has said they have to, but there isn't a signed and sealed agreement with Malaysia yet. Manus Island isn't ready. The deal with Thailand hasn't been done. I mean, it's really getting to crunch point.
It's getting to crunch point, but there's an inevitability about the fact that was always going to be tested, which is all the more reason why the government's going to have to do something. One thing about this 5-to-1 ratio, though, the opposition is now complaining about that. But I thought the whole problem with boat people was the idea that they were queue jumpers and against legitimate refugees, and that it was about trying to stop the people smugglers. Now, whatever you think about this policy, if it does have that effect of stopping the people smugglers being able to sell a ticket to Australia on their boat, and it means that legitimate processed refugees who've been waiting in camps get in, I can't see why there should be criticism.
And the Coalition always said the bona fides of their compassion towards refugees was an increase in the refugee intake.
Exactly.
So it's hard to see how you can complain about a larger number of refugees coming from the front of the queue if you are in fact stopping the people smugglers.
I think it's definitely on the run. You know, they haven't put everything in place, but it is becoming operational that boats, the new policy is that people are taken to Christmas Island, they're not properly processed and they're being told they're going to go to the back of the queue, but we haven't seen that fully implemented. The queue, of course, the intake is increasing, that the Malaysian deal did provide an increase in a humanitarian intake, and it'll be interesting to see whether if they do strike a deal with Thailand, for example, do we have a further increase in our humanitarian intake.
And too late for the papers, but other news overnight is that Manchester City won the FA Cup, and that explains the jersey starch.
The last time Manchester City won the FA Cup final, of course, was 1969, and this is the strip they wore.
OK. Right, well, that'll be coming up in Offsiders later on. That's the Sunday papers, and now to our studio guest, and of course the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. And while she joins us here in the studio, here's the Opposition Leader, Tony Abbott, and part of his budget and reply speech.